He smiled in every family photo, his arm wrapped around the woman he claimed to love, his daughter laughing in his lap, a picture of warmth and devotion. But behind that smile was a darkness no one saw coming. On a quiet Friday evening in Robinsonville, Mississippi, July 11, 2025, that darkness finally broke loose. In just minutes, one woman would lose her life, 2 others would be left bleeding, and the man responsible, their own father, would vanish into the night. This wasn't a random act of violence. It wasn't a stranger kicking down a door or a rival with a grudge. This was something far more disturbing. A story of control, obsession, and silence that stretched over 10 long years. A story with 7 police calls, 7 chances to stop it, and 7 warnings ignored. This is the True Crime Shadow, where we pull back the curtain on the stories the world tried to forget. The ones that hide behind smiles, behind closed doors, behind the idea of, "It could never happen here." If you're new to the channel, hit subscribe and join our growing community of truth seekers who refuse to look away. Because in every shadow there's a story, and tonight, we're stepping into one that still haunts Mississippi. This is the tragic story of Nykeria Jude, a woman who loved too deeply, and Markello Braxton, the man who turned love into a weapon. Robinsonville, Mississippi, Friday night, July 11, 2025. The summer air was thick and quiet, the kind of evening where families wind down and kids chase lightning bugs outside before bedtime. But inside one modest home on a small street just off the highway, a storm had been brewing for years, and that night, it finally exploded. At 7:06 p.m., neighbors heard what they thought were fireworks. A quick burst, pop, 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 followed by screams that tore through the still air. Within minutes, emergency calls flooded Tunica County Dispatch. Reports of multiple gunshots, people bleeding, a child crying for help. When deputies arrived, they found a scene that didn't make sense at first. 30-year-old Nykeria Jude lay motionless on the living room floor, blood pooling beneath her. Her 6-year-old daughter, Layia Braxton, had been shot and was barely conscious, whispering for her mother. Across the room, Marquavius Young, the shooter's adult son from another relationship, was bleeding heavily, fighting to stay awake. And the man responsible, Markello Braxton, 41 years old, was gone. Vanished. In those first chaotic minutes, no one could believe what they were hearing. Officers ran through the house, clearing rooms, calling for medics, shouting commands over the sound of sirens. Neighbors stood outside in shock, watching stretcher after stretcher roll out of the doorway. It wasn't until investigators pieced together what happened that the real horror set in. The shooter wasn't some stranger who broke in. He wasn't a thief or an enemy. He was the father. The same man who smiled in every family photo, who promised to protect them, who had once held his daughter in his arms and told her she was his world. That night, those words meant nothing. What drove a father to turn on the people who loved him most? What could twist love into something so violent, so final? The answers, investigators would learn, had been building for nearly a decade, and the warning signs were everywhere. But that wasn't the whole story. Before her name became a headline, Nykeria Jude was known simply as Nikki. To her friends, she was the kind of woman who could walk into any room and make it feel lighter just by being there. She didn't need attention or flash. She had that quiet kind of warmth that made people trust her instantly. Born and raised in Mississippi, she built her life on simple joys. Family dinners, laughter with her cousins, her little girl's giggles echoing through the house. People who knew her said she was genuine to the core. She wasn't chasing clout, money, or chaos. She wanted peace, a small home, steady love, a safe space for her daughter. Her friends often said she had a smile that could light up every dark corner. And that wasn't just a figure of speech. Nikki radiated light, even when she was tired, even when life threw her curveballs. She was the type who would give her last dollar to help someone else. And when she became a mother, that light only grew stronger. Her daughter, Layia, was her entire world. Photos from her social media show the two of them side by side. Matching outfits, messy hair, endless laughter. Nykeria's captions always read the same: my reason, my everything. She wasn't just raising her child, she was building a future for her, one full of love and stability. But behind those smiles and carefully chosen words, something darker was beginning to take hold. Because while Nykeria was focused on love and family, the man standing beside her in those photos, Markello Braxton, was becoming someone else entirely. When they first met, Markello was older, charming, protective. 11 years separated them, but Nykeria saw maturity where others might have seen danger. He made her feel safe, special, like she was his world. And for a while that world felt solid. They laughed, celebrated birthdays, welcomed their baby girl, and built a life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. But soon that image began to crack. Friends noticed she smiled less, posted less. Calls went unanswered. Family gatherings became rare. People said she seemed smaller, like she was fading into herself. That spark that made her unforgettable was dimming. And behind closed doors, Markello's love had turned into control. He started asking where she was, who she talked to, why she didn't answer right away. Every question came with an edge. Every visit ended in tension. The man who once called her his peace had become the storm she couldn't escape. Still, she tried to hold the family together, for Layya's sake, for the hope that maybe he'd change. She wanted her daughter to grow up with both parents, to never feel broken homes or shouting matches. But love can't fix what's already cracked. Soon Nykeria stopped going out. She avoided conflict. She stopped answering calls from friends who asked too many questions. Her world became smaller and quieter, until it revolved entirely around him and their daughter. To anyone looking from the outside, it still looked like love, a couple who'd been together for years raising their little girl. But inside that house, every day was a calculation. What to say, how to act, how not to trigger the next explosion. And when Nykeria finally told Markello she was done, when she said the words, "I can't do this anymore," something in him snapped. There was no begging, no apology, no tears. Just a cold promise. "If you leave me," he told her, "I'll make you regret it." It wasn't an argument. It was a threat. That's the thing about people like Markello. They don't see love as partnership. They see it as ownership. And when control starts to slip, they'll do anything to take it back. Even if it means destroying everything they once claimed to love. After that, the police started showing up more often. Neighbors would hear shouting and call it in. Deputies would knock on the door, talk to them both, then leave without making an arrest. Each visit ended the same way. No charges, no follow-up, just more fear when the lights of the patrol cars faded down the street. And for 10 years, that cycle repeated. It was as if every red flag had been waving in plain sight, but no one wanted to look too closely. Because how do you tell someone to walk away from the only life they've built? How do you convince them they deserve better when they've been told for years that they don't? By the time Nykeria realized she was truly in danger, it was already too late. She tried to leave, tried to reclaim her peace, but Markello wasn't about to let her go. Not peacefully. Not alive. Between 2015 and 2025, deputies were called to that same house on Solly Drive 7 times. 7 separate domestic disturbance reports. 7 moments when someone could have stepped in, when someone could have saved her. But every single time the cycle reset. The first call came in July 2015, just a few months after Layia was born. Neighbors heard shouting, things breaking, a woman crying. Deputies showed up, talked to both of them and left. No arrest. No report anyone could find. Just another night in Mississippi. The calls kept coming. 2016, 2018, 2020, 2023, and finally March 10, 2025, 4 months before the shooting. Every visit told the same story. Raised voices, arguments, fear that couldn't quite be proven. Because when the door opened and deputies asked what was going on, Nykeria always said the same thing. "It's fine. We just argued." He didn't mean it. It's the line thousands of victims say every day, not because it's true, but because saying anything else feels dangerous. Because when the uniforms leave, the abuser stays. Maybe she thought he'd calm down. Maybe she hoped things would change. Or maybe she just didn't have anywhere else to go. People forget that leaving isn't simple, it's survival math. Where do you go when the person you fear also pays the bills? How do you run when running might be the thing that makes them snap? Still, each of those calls was a flashing red warning. each one a crack in the surface of a life that was supposed to be ordinary. Yet the system that should have protected her moved like it always does, slow, reactive, distant. No restraining order that held. No follow-up that lasted. Just reports filed away while the danger kept growing. And on that final call in March 2025, something in Nykeria's voice must have sounded different. Tired, scared, done. Because a neighbor later said she looked like a woman who knew her time was running out. But the call stopped. And just 4 months later, July 11, 2025, those 7 warnings became the echo that no one could ignore. Because when the system fails to protect, the aftermath isn't just tragedy, it's proof. Proof that silence kills. Proof that fear can look a lot like love. Proof that sometimes, the person you need saving from is the one sleeping beside you. And when the silence finally broke that night in Robinsonville, it did so with 3 gunshots that changed everything. Friday, July 11, 2025. Robinsonville, Mississippi. The kind of night that feels too ordinary to ever end in tragedy. The sun was setting over the flat fields, the cicadas humming, families winding down. But inside that small home on Solly Drive, the air was thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. No one knows exactly what started the argument that night. Maybe it was a word, a look, a message on a phone. Maybe nothing at all. Because for people like Markello Braxton, it never takes much. When control starts to slip, when fear turns into anger, anything can become the spark. At 7:06 p.m., the first shots rang out. Neighbors thought it was fireworks. Mississippi summer nights are full of them. But these weren't fireworks. They were bullets tearing through a home that had already been breaking for years. Inside chaos, Nykeria Jude, just 30 years old, was hit multiple times. She collapsed where she stood, her life ending in the very room where she'd once celebrated birthdays and sang lullabies. Her 6-year-old daughter, Layia, was shot too, her small body caught in the crossfire of the man she still called Daddy. And Marquavius Young, Markello's 24-year-old son from another relationship, was hit as well, either trying to help or simply standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. 3 victims. 1 gun. And a man who had finally become what everyone feared he could be. When the neighbors ran outside, the screaming was all they heard. They dialed 911, voices shaking, begging for help. Within minutes, Tunica County deputies were racing toward the address with sirens blaring. The scene they walked into was something no training could prepare them for. Nykeria lay still, unresponsive, her blood pooling across the floor. The deputies tried to find a pulse, tried to save her, but she was already gone. Layia was conscious but barely, crying, confused, asking for her mother. Marquavius was bleeding heavily, drifting in and out. Paramedics flooded the home, rushing the injured out on stretchers, their hands slick with blood, their radios crackling for backup. And then came the realization that changed everything. Markello Braxton was gone. Vanished into the night, gun in hand, nowhere to be found. Within the hour, an all-points bulletin went out. Helicopters filled the air. Patrol cars sealed off the highways. U.S. Marshals joined the hunt. A father had just murdered the mother of his child and shot both of his own kids, and now he was on the run. The community locked its doors that night. Parents kept their children inside. No one slept easy. People whispered that maybe he'd gone north to Memphis, maybe across state lines, maybe hiding in the woods. But no one really knew. What they didn't realize was that he hadn't gone anywhere at all. He was closer than anyone imagined, watching, waiting, and deciding how his story would end. The search for Markello Braxton began before the blood on the floor had even dried. Within an hour of the shooting, his face was everywhere. On social media, on local news broadcasts, and every law enforcement briefing across Mississippi. The Tunica County Sheriff's Office called in the U.S. Marshals, state troopers, and even neighboring counties to help track him down. This wasn't just another fugitive. This was a man who had already killed once, who had turned a gun on his own children, and who had nothing left to lose. Helicopters swept the skies over Robinsonville, their searchlights cutting through fields and tree lines. K-9 units combed through ditches and wooded patches near the house. Deputies went door to door, checking garages, barns, and abandoned trailers, anywhere a desperate man might hide. The sense of fear was everywhere. Parents kept their kids home from summer programs. Store owners double-locked their doors. Even the quiet back roads, usually empty by midnight, were now lined with flashing blue lights. People stayed glued to their TVs and phones, praying he wouldn't show up at their doorstep. Rumors started spreading online. Some said Markello had fled to Memphis just 30 minutes away. Others claimed he'd crossed into Arkansas or was hiding with friends who didn't yet know what he'd done. But there were no sightings that stuck, just whispers, panic, and dead ends. Days passed. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and still no sign of him. Every newscast repeated the same question. How does a man just disappear after something like that? But while helicopters circled overhead and officers scoured miles of countryside, no one imagined the truth was right under their feet. Because Markello Braxton hadn't fled across state lines. He hadn't vanished into another city. He was still there, still in Robinsonville, still near the home where he'd ended everything. He had never left. And when they finally found him, the discovery would leave even seasoned investigators shaken. 4 days after the shooting, July 15, 2025, officers were still searching. They'd covered miles of ground, followed every lead, and chased every rumor. But as the sun began to dip behind the Mississippi trees that Monday evening, a deputy walking the wooded stretch behind Solly Drive noticed something strange. A faint smell, the kind that makes every cop stop cold. Just 100 yards from the very home where the massacre happened, hidden in a patch of thick brush between a field and the edge of a golf course, they found him. Markello Braxton, 41 years old. Dead from a single, self-inflicted gunshot wound. He hadn't run across state lines or escaped to another city. He'd stayed right there in those woods, close enough to see the flashing lights, close enough to hear the helicopters and dogs searching for him. For 4 days, while the community locked their doors in fear, he was lying there, silent, a coward who couldn't face what he'd done. The Tunica County Sheriff's Office confirmed the discovery, explaining that he was found in an overgrown section of land between two properties. The body was sent to the Mississippi State Crime Lab for identification, but there was no doubt who it was. The manhunt was over. And just like that, the story ended the same way it began, with violence and silence. No confession, no trial, no apology, just destruction. While investigators documented the scene, the reality began to sink in for everyone who'd followed the case. The man they had been searching for hadn't been running at all. He had been hiding, watching from the shadows of the same community he tore apart. Lieutenant William Rooker of the Tunica County Sheriff's Office described it best. He was right there the whole time in that section between the properties. As officers packed up and the blue lights dimmed one final time, there were no cheers, no closure. Just the heavy quiet of a town trying to understand how something like this could happen so close to home. But for two people, Marquavius Young and 6-year-old Layia Braxton, the story was far from over. Because while one life had ended in those woods, 2 others were still fighting to stay alive in Memphis hospitals. And what happened next would move an entire community to tears. While Markello Braxton's body lay in the woods, 2 survivors were still fighting for their lives. In Memphis, doctors worked around the clock to save Marquavius Young, 24, and Layia Braxton, just 6 years old. They'd both been airlifted out of Robinsonville on the night of the shooting. Marquavius to Regional 1 Hospital, and little Layia to Le Bonheur Children's Hospital, one of the best pediatric trauma centers in the South. 4 days the updates were uncertain. Both were listed in critical condition. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers prayed for them. Outside the hospitals, people gathered for candlelight vigils, holding signs that read "Justice for Nykeria" and "Pray for the babies." Then, 3 days later, a small miracle, Marquavius was released. Bruised, bandaged, exhausted, but alive. He didn't say much to reporters, just thanked God for sparing him. But the pain in his eyes said everything. He'd lost his father and witnessed a nightmare no one should ever see. And then came the moment the entire county had been waiting for. On Tuesday, July 15th, doctors finally said the words everyone had prayed for. Layia can go home. But her return wasn't quiet or simple. It was something the community would never forget. The Tunica County Sheriff's Office, along with departments from Shelby, DeSoto, and Coahoma counties, organized something extraordinary, a full police escort to bring her home. Not for fear but for hope. When the hospital doors opened, the sound of engines filled the air. Patrol cars lined the street for miles, lights flashing blue and white, forming a convoy across 4 counties. Every few miles, a new set of deputies would take over the escort, ensuring that one brave little girl knew she wasn't alone on her journey back. Sheriff Casey Hamp released a statement that captured exactly what that day meant. After everything she's been through, we wanted her to know that the blue lights she remembers don't have to mean tragedy. They can mean love, strength, and protection. As the convoy rolled through the neighborhoods, people lined the roads holding balloons and handmade signs. Some cried. Some saluted. Others just stood in silence, watching the tiny figure in the backseat of her grandparents' car, brave, fragile, but alive. When they finally pulled into her grandparents' driveway, the crowd erupted. Neighbors cheered. Family members hugged officers. Balloons floated into the sky. And for a moment, in that place that had seen so much pain, something beautiful happened. Hope took its first breath again. Marleya's grandmother, Angela Walls, could barely speak through her tears. "It made me want to cry for all the love they showed right here around my house," she said. That night, the little girl who had survived the unimaginable finally slept in her own bed. But nothing would ever be the same. Her mother was gone. Her father was the one who took her away. And now, at just 6 years old, she carried scars that ran far deeper than any wound doctors could see. A few days later, she spoke softly to a reporter. Her words were small, innocent, but they broke hearts everywhere. "I miss my mommy," she said. "Her name is Nykeria Jude. I miss her so much." Then she looked up at the camera, her voice barely above a whisper. "God loves everybody." 6 years old, and already wiser than the world that failed her. But even as the community celebrated her recovery, another question was spreading fast. How could this have happened after 7 police calls, 10 years of warning signs, and endless chances to stop it? Because now it wasn't just about a family destroyed. It was about a system that had all the information, and still did nothing. The truth is, Nykeria Jude didn't have to die. This wasn't random. It wasn't unpredictable. It was a tragedy that played out in slow motion for 10 years while the people who could have helped looked the other way. 7 police calls. 7. Each one a warning, each one a chance to change the outcome. But time and time again the cycle restarted. The system logged the incidents, filed the reports, and moved on. Deputies could respond, take statements, even arrest a suspect. But without solid evidence or a willing witness, the law's hands are tied. And when that witness is terrified, living with the person who hurts them, the silence becomes deadly. That's the dark truth about domestic violence. It doesn't usually happen out of nowhere. It builds quietly over time. It starts with control. Where were you? Who were you talking to? Why didn't you answer? Then comes isolation. The victim stops seeing friends, stops talking to family, stops asking for help. And finally, when they do find the courage to leave, that's when the danger peaks. Because leaving doesn't end abuse, it challenges control. And when someone like Markello Braxton felt that control slipping away, he did what too many abusers do. He turned violent. What makes this story so painful isn't just what happened inside that house. It's what happened outside it. 7 times officers stood on that doorstep. 7 times they could have connected her with shelter programs, counseling, or a safe exit plan. But instead, the door closed, the sirens faded, and nothing changed. It's not about blaming a single deputy or department. It's about a system that reacts instead of prevents. A system built to respond after something terrible happens, instead of stepping in before it's too late. And that's not just a Mississippi problem. It's everywhere. Across the country, domestic violence is one of the most underreported, underenforced crimes there is. According to national data, nearly half of all female homicide victims are killed by someone they once loved. We tell victims to call for help, but what happens when help arrives, and then leaves? The truth is, a piece of paper doesn't stop a bullet. Restraining orders, police reports, court hearings, They all matter, but they mean nothing to someone who's already decided to destroy everything. That's why this story matters. Because it forces us to ask hard questions. How many more times will victims be told to just leave? How many more warnings need to come before someone listens? And how many more children have to grow up without parents because we waited until it was too late? Nykeria's story isn't just about one family, it's a reflection of a broken cycle that repeats itself in silence. But silence is what feeds it. If you or someone you know is living in fear, don't wait. There are people who can help. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE-7233 or reach out to a local support service near you. You are not alone. Because if this case proves anything, it's that ignoring the signs doesn't make the danger disappear. It only gives it time to grow. And for Nykeria Jude, time ran out. When you strip away the headlines, the police reports, and the chaos, you're left with a simple, heartbreaking truth. Nykeria Jude was a woman who just wanted peace. She wanted love without fear. A home where laughter didn't turn into shouting. A future where her daughter could grow up safe. She didn't get that chance. At just 30 years old, her story ended on the floor of her own home, taken by the man who once promised to protect her. But even in her death, Nykeria left behind something stronger than the violence that ended her life: her light. Everyone who knew her says the same thing, that she had a smile that could lift an entire room, that she loved without limits, and that she treated everyone like family. That light now lives on in Layia, Braxton, the daughter she loved more than anything in the world. A child who's already endured more pain than most adults could bear, but who still looks at the world with hope. Her words, "God loves everybody," echo louder than any gunshot. They remind us that even in darkness, innocence survives. And Markello Young, who stood between his father's rage and everyone else that night, carries a different kind of strength, the strength of survival. The courage to keep going when everything you know collapses. Both survivors are living proof that even after destruction, life finds a way to rebuild. Across Mississippi, the community continues to honor Nykeria Jude. Vigils have been held, murals painted, donations raised to support Layya's recovery. People say her story changed them, that it opened their eyes to what so many victims endure in silence. Because what happened in Robinsonville wasn't just one man's rage, it was the failure of a system, the silence of neighbors, the fear that keeps too many people trapped in danger. And every time her story is told, it breaks that silence a little more. So maybe that's her legacy. Not just the tragedy that ended her life, but the awareness that might save someone else's. Maybe somewhere, another woman hearing this will recognize the signs. Maybe she'll make that call, reach out, or find the courage to leave. And maybe this time someone will listen. Nykeria Jude should have grown old. She should have watched her daughter graduate, fall in love, build a life. Instead, she became another name on a list far too long. But her story isn't forgotten. Not here. Not tonight. Because in the shadows of her pain, there's a message the world can't afford to ignore. Love should never hurt. And control should never wear the face of care. You've been watching The True Crime Shadow, where we uncover the stories that live behind the headlines and refuse to fade away. This story moved you? Share it. Talk about it. Someone you know might need to hear it. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our growing community, because every week, we shine a light on the darkest corners of human stories, where truth meets tragedy. Until next time, stay aware, stay kind, and never stop looking beyond the surface. Because every shadow tells a story.